Hello, I'm Sami Zaidan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, flying taxis, mega deals and management shake-ups. We'll look at the flight plan for global aviation in 2018 after a turbulent year here in the Gulf. Also this week, arms sales. They're on the rise. Find out why and what that tells us about the state of the global economy going into the new year. Plus, a matter of life and death on the Nile, but for which country? Why Egypt's calling for the World Bank to help settle a dispute on the longest river in Africa. Well, as 2018 gets underway, a couple of big multi-billion-dollar deals are in play, which could change the face of entire industries. Now, there's one blockbuster deal that could reshape the global aerospace industry. Aircraft maker Boeing has held multi-billion-dollar talks for a takeover of Brazil's Embraer. Now, the deal, should it go ahead, would combine the world's largest aerospace company with the third largest passenger jet maker. The Brazilian government would have to sign off on it, and the two players have only confirmed they've had private talks. But the move is being viewed within the industry as significant. It would advance a consolidation wave sweeping through the aerospace sector. Now, you might remember in October, European rival Airbus secured a controlling stake in the C-Series jet from Canada's Bombardier. And aviation was also in focus this week here in the Middle East. Tunisia is demanding an apology from the United Arab Emirates after the UAE banned Tunisian women from flying to the Gulf state or transiting its airports. In retaliation, Dubai-based Emirates Airlines has been banned from operating flights to and from Tunisia. Charlotte Bellis reports.
This was the scene at Tunis airport on Friday as women turned up for flights. The start of a UAE travel ban against women and girls of all ages.
I came here and found chaos, and they're saying Tunisian women under the age of 30 cannot board Emirate planes. I arrive here only for a man to come and tell me that any woman who holds a Tunisian passport is banned from boarding this airline.
2 days later, the UAE explained the temporary travel restriction is for security reasons. The Emirati Minister of State for Foreign Affairs posted on Twitter they had communicated security information with Tunisia and that the UAE appreciates and values Tunisian women. But outrage across Tunisia and elsewhere grew with claims of discrimination and racism. Tunisia's government took immediate action. The Ministry of Transport has decided to suspend Emirates Airlines flights to and from Tunisia until the latter finds a suitable solution to operate its flights in accordance with international regulations and conventions. Emirates didn't respond to our request for an interview, but did confirm via Twitter they were instructed to stop services to Tunis by Tunisian authorities effective December 25th.
Children as young as 2 years old were being barred from flying. I mean, not many people would consider a 2-year-old a threat, and officials were even informing families that even if you were a 1-month-old female baby, you wouldn't be allowed to fly and you wouldn't be allowed to enter the UAE territory.
Emirates is the only airline that flies UAE-Tunisia direct, meaning it severed the transport link between the countries. It's unclear if the diplomatic link will also be cut. Tunisia has been trying to repair relations with the UAE after its 2011 revolution. Its biggest political party, Al Nahda, has strong ties to Qatar, currently under blockade by the UAE and 3 other Arab countries. Emirates will remain suspended until Tunisia feels it can operate within international regulations. The sudden and vague ban that Tunisian women face now turned on the airline.
Well, joining us from London is Peter Morris. Peter is a chief economist at Global Flight. Good to have you with us. Now, from Emirates Air flights to Tunisia, to Qatar Airways flights to some Arab destinations, it seems like we went a little ban-happy in the Middle East in 2017. How did that impact the region as a travel hub?
Well, I think you've probably got to take the camera back to some extent and look at what's happened in the industry overall, and then within it, what's happened within the Middle East. And I think the first thing that's interesting is if you actually look at the end of last year, IATA was looking at about 5% or so traffic growth for the year. In fact, it's turned out to be more than 50% higher than that, or at 7% and a bit. So overall, the global industry has really done pretty well, and profits have maintained the same kind of level that they had in 2016. So, overall, the industry is feeling good about itself. However, what happened in the Middle East, and there's been a succession of issues that started with the US administration introducing certain visa rules, followed by laptop bans and so on, all of which impacted potential demand on an important network for Gulf carriers in particular. But what's happened is that there's pretty much been a handbrake stop on the kind of levels of growth that you've seen from 2012 to 2016, which are around 10 to 15% or so for Etihad, for Qatar and for Emirates. And those have dropped to pretty much 1 to 2% or so year on year, and it's going to be even less when you roll forward into 2018.
To what extent do you think it's going to impact those Gulf carriers in 2018 and beyond?
Well, I think what's interesting is to look at that in the background of an industry that without doubt those Gulf carriers profited from the economies of scale that they achieved, and particularly developing markets to North America, Europe to Asia Pacific and so on. And so there has been a certain degree of scrabbling necessary, given the sudden changes that occurred on the political front, to try and find new markets to adapt to the capacity that's coming on stream, and also to find ways to slow down. Well, I mean, it's pretty much you've got to. What you're finding is certain carriers are being excluded from certain markets for whatever reason. And so that where they were looking at 10, 12% growth, they can't be looking at that. In fact, they're looking at no growth at all on those particular markets. So they've got to look at alternatives.
Now, if we broaden it out a little bit and talk a little more global, we've got Airbus buying a stake in Bombardier, Boeing possibly doing the same with Embraer. Is the market, though, heading towards consolidation?
Well, it's interesting that Bombardier were pretty well dependent on that Delta deal, and if the Delta deal fell through, and particularly if these tariffs of 300% or whatever the figure was going to be brought in, clearly it will make the whole deal infeasible. So Airbus, to some extent, have helped them out, but I think that there is a real advantage for Airbus in looking at having a plant within North America that will actually have a lower cost of operation than either Europe or Canada. So it's not just philanthropy that's taking place by Airbus. And indeed, in the case of Boeing, it's a question of whether they could be looking at the kind of potential they could have in terms of outsourcing certain elements to Brazil, where there's a lower labour cost and there is a highly trained workforce as well on the aviation side.
Well, they're getting perhaps lower production costs, but ultimately what does it mean for consumers as these companies get bigger and bigger?
Well, I think you're seeing a transition phase at the moment where these Bombardier and Embraer both have kind of top of the range, bottom of the narrow body range in terms of the kind of standard 737 or A320, so that what they're doing is bringing in an airplane that's much more economic, but it's still got a certain capacity limit.
And talking about the future, I mean, Airbus is supposed to start testing its air taxi service in 2018. You've got that joint effort by Embraer, NASA and Uber. They'll be testing theirs in 2020. To what extent do air taxis, do you think, represent the future of the taxi business?
Well, I think you're talking niche there, aren't you? I mean, there's been the whole sort of very light jet phase in which you were talking about 2 to 6 people type jets that could operate at a much lower cost. But nonetheless, that's only been a niche market. I think the economies of scale are such that you see something happening at the narrow body level, the sort of 150 to 175 seats, and that's a kind of sweet spot in terms of economics of operation. If you look at the wide body, that similar sweet spots around 350, 400 type seats. And I think it's very, very difficult to get the economics right when you're talking about one pilot and possibly even two pilots flying 6 people. You know, the economics just don't stack up against
hang on, Peter, I thought at some point these services are supposed to be pilotless. You know, is the autonomous plane the way forward?
I think there's a lot of psychological barriers. Probably the technical barriers have all been solved to some degree, but the psychological barriers for the passengers and for the airline operating those particular vehicles will always be challenging to some extent. You can imagine the situation if there is some kind of problem that occurs and the excitement that will be in the media about that, even though you know, aviation is the safest form of public transport, but nonetheless you're going to see an intense focus before those pilotless aircraft are going to be permitted. You know, even looking at moving from 2 pilots to 1 pilot is a considerable challenge for airlines. So moving from 1 to 0, it's not that the problems are really technical, the problems are almost certainly psychological and regulatory.
Yeah, who wants to be talking to a machine when they're up in the air? Anyway, thanks so much, Morris there.
Okay.
Now, 2017 was the year the driverless car and trucks became a reality. We saw them being tested on roads in the US and UK. Developers say more than 1 million lives a year could be saved without humans behind the wheel, as accidents would be almost eradicated. But that could also mean a loss of millions of jobs. Lawrence Lee has more.
In this brave new world of artificial intelligence, the first direct effect on all our lives will be in transport. It's already begun, and it will change humanity in many ways. It's well enough known by now that driverless cars and lorries are being trialled. The future, we're told, may involve our children not having to learn how to drive.
Please press the automation button to place the car in automated mode.
Right, so here we go. Where's this one? Even sitting in a simulator, you feel a lack of control as you don't grip the wheel or press the brakes. Driving one for real involves a leap of faith.
Automation gathers control. Please center the steering wheel. You are now free to engage in other tasks.
The engineers here are sure the technology is good enough for driverless travel on motorways, if not in congested cities.
Because there's too much going on, you know, this is an extremely busy and complex environment with lots of potential distractors, people running across the roads. So I think that's probably too complex. We've certainly tried contemporary vehicle automation, both on the motorway and in urban environments. They don't work at all in urban environments, and even on motorways they require regular interventions by human drivers.
The future, it seems, may be a combination of systems moving us from pod to driverless pod.
Monorail systems near airports are driverless, and people use those quite happily. The paths of the cars through space would be similar to if there were, you know, some physical guide to them. So I think in some cases, so long as the speeds are fairly low, it's probably a safe proposition.
True believers in driverless transport say we will be able to sleep or work in our vehicle. But if that sounds good, it will also mean the loss of millions of jobs. No wonder trades unions want to know how those jobs will be replaced.
We're looking to see a massive investment in electric vehicles, driverless vehicles, future mobility. We need a great leap forwards.
It's easy to understand this concern. In the UK, there was a massive shock when car factories, which had traditionally employed thousands of people, all shut because of foreign competition. This used to be the Jaguar factory in the West Midlands. Now it's going to be a warehouse. The advent of driverless cars and wider automation could be a far greater shock still. The British government reckons that driverless cars could create up to 30,000 jobs in the UK, which sounds okay until you hear evidence that says that in this part of England alone, automation could cost 300,000 jobs. It becomes pretty clear that governments like the one in Britain need a job strategy for automation, and quickly. We're asked to consider a world in which no humans at the wheel of a vehicle means accidents will not happen, and more than 1 million lives will be saved every year. Driverless vehicles will be on the roads, and soon. But will humans whose jobs rely on transport accept them? And can we learn to trust the machines to safeguard the lives of those we love?
Still to come on Counting the Cost, how entrepreneurs from a refugee camp are turning old tents into a thriving bag business. The River Nile is one of the world's most important water resources. Nearly 250 million people depend on it. Africa's largest hydro dam, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is set to begin filling up its reservoir in the new year. And it's not clear what that will mean for other countries downstream. So the $4.8 billion mega project is raising massive concerns about water rights. Egypt calls it a matter of life or death, but so does Ethiopia, which needs the dam to transform its economy. Addis Ababa says previous agreements on water sharing are outdated, and now Egypt has asked the World Bank to step in as a neutral party.
We usually work and cooperate to avoid any kind of tension, and there are some issues that should be taken away and separated from others. And I think the water issue of Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia should bring us together in union, because it's the issue related to the future and the interest of the three countries.
This dam will not bring any significant harm upon the Egyptian side, and we are working at the state of this. We are trying to be very transparent. The important thing here is that if there are any concerns that come from the Egyptians, we are working very closely to solve them.
For more interviews and explainers on the dam and the history behind access to Nile waters, take a look at our previous shows on hydroeconomics at aljazeera.com/countingthecost. It's a story that's likely to top government agendas in several African countries in the year ahead. This year's Atlantic hurricane season left a path of death and destruction in the US and the Caribbean. It cost an estimated $200 billion in damage. Coastal communities were the worst hit. Severe weather is being linked to climate change, and as Jacob Ward reports from California, rising sea levels are also something to worry about if you live by the sea.
For years, scientists have been warning us that by the end of this century, climate change will bring more storms, more forest fires and drought, as well as rising sea levels. But a new report from the Union of Concerned Scientists is getting specific, revealing the exact neighborhoods, block by block, that the union says will be repeatedly flooded within the next 6 decades. Alameda in Northern California is one of them.
The San Francisco Bay Area is hopeful that this former naval base could relieve its overcrowded housing market. But if the projections are correct, that is not going to work out. So this would be underwater.
This would be one of the first neighborhoods in Alameda that would see chronic flooding due to sea level rise.
What's chronic flooding?
By that we mean flooding on average every other week.
Every other week?
That's right, 26 times a year.
Wow.
Dr. Christy Dahl, co-author of the report, says that having seen the data, she feels we must rethink where we live.
When we first set out to research sea level rise, we had the impression that a lot of people do, that it's something that won't be affecting us until the end of the century, perhaps. But when we started to look at not just what's going to be permanently underwater, but what's going to be flooded often enough that functionally it's unusable, that's when we saw that this problem is really going to start affecting communities decades earlier than we had anticipated.
A waterfront house has always been a symbol of success. But as the water rises, it may yet come to symbolize the very real dangers of climate change.
Global arms sales are up, according to the latest report from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Its latest report shows that US group Lockheed Martin is now the world's top arms producer. And Brexit didn't seem to have an impact on the arms sales of British companies. BAE ranks number 4 on the top 100 list of global arms producers. Russia has been selling more aggressively in the past few years, and Chinese companies too are exporting more. The report also said South Korea is becoming a bigger player among so-called emerging producers. Earlier, I spoke with Peter Wiseman, senior researcher of the Arms and Military Expenditure Programme at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. I began by asking him what the size of the global arms market tells us about the state of the global economy.
I think on the one hand, it's a significant industry, and we talk about, for example, the total sales of those 100 largest arms producing companies in the world amount to something like 375 billion a year. That's a significant amount on the one hand, but on the other hand, if we really look at how that compares to other industries, let's say the car industry, if we look at the largest arms producing company in the world, which is Lockheed Martin in the US, they have a turnover of about 40 billion in 2016. A company like Volkswagen has a turnover which is easily 5 times as big. Put things a bit in perspective. The arms industry is important. The arms industry has an impact, but in terms of the economical impact, it is actually not that large. We don't talk about a very large percentage here of the world economy.
Other than instability, what other factors are linked or driving the global increase in demand for arms?
Well, I think one is the perception that military capability is important for security, a perception which, of course, is kind of driven, is kind of supported by the industry itself. They do what they have to do as an industry. They will try to sell their product and try to explain the world that their product is needed to create stability and security on the national or regional or even the global level. And that is a very important factor here too. The other one is economic developments. States that have more to spend tend also to spend more on arms. And finally, there is, of course, that idea, and I'm not saying it is true, but that is the idea that investment in the arms industry can lead to technological development of a country. That's a very questionable thesis to make, but I think it still is an important one which is being used by the arms industry to sell their products.
And finally, the plight of refugees is something that's likely to remain a focus in the year ahead. One country on the front line of the refugee crisis is, of course, Greece. Jonah Hull has this report from Athens on how entrepreneurship is an important key to integration.
While misery continues to stalk those on the refugee route into Europe, in a little warehouse north of Athens, some lives are changing for the better.
Right now, yes. I'm happy.
Now I'm very, very happy. I can't explain.
Here, refugees from Afghanistan, Pakistan and Iran run a business making bags and backpacks using old tents and other material from the camp they once lived in.
I can support my family. I could take care of my children better. As long as I have a job here, I'm happy to stay here.
Lisa Campbell founded the NGO that set up this business.
What it does is give them a reason to be able to stay here because they are safe here. Their kids can go to school here. They have medical care here. There are reasons to stay in Greece if you have a job.
The Greek government has closed a number of refugee camps on the mainland, preferring to try and integrate refugees into society. All that remains of Onofita camp is the site map and whatever these budding entrepreneurs could salvage. This is a pile of beds recovered from a recently closed refugee camp. This canvas will soon be turned into designer items. It is, if you like, the upcycling of the refugee crisis. This business turning a lot of misery into a little bit of hope and happiness made in Greece. Here, at least, the exercise in integration is going well.
I think it's a great improvement for the area, and people can get to know what these refugees and organisations are doing.
But Lisa Campbell knows they're really only scratching the surface of a much bigger problem.
I want to know that I've made a difference in these lives, and maybe the example somebody else can pick up on. Maybe other people can do the same thing to help those thousands upon thousands upon thousands.
But it's a start, and the bags are selling like hotcakes online.
And that's our show for this week, but remember you can get in touch with us via Twitter. Use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Sami Zaidan from the whole team here. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.